Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first webinar series of the huge project. We will give a couple of minutes to allow attendees to connect. So please bear with us and we'll be with you very shortly. Okay, thank you all. And again, welcome to our first webinar series of the huge project. So we have today, I'm Pau Farras. I'm a lecturer in chemistry at the National University of Ireland in Galway, and I'm one of the partners of the huge project. We have also with me Magnus Davidson from the Environmental Resource Institute, who will be helping out with the moderation of the questions and answers. And on the background, we have also Desislava Todorova, the coordinator of the project, and Roberto Gonzalez, who is also in Galway in my research group. So first of all, a couple of things for you to know. So as you have seen, you cannot talk during the presentation. You are all muted, but you have the possibility to ask questions on the chat. We have some instructions that we have left in the chat, so you can go through them. But the most important thing is that you can ask questions whenever you want during the presentation, and just remember to say or write down which is the slide number that you are questioning your question. Then, before we start with the speaker, we want to share with you a short video explaining what is the huge project about. So, Roberto, we are all in your hands. Please, you can share the video now. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Roberto. So after this very first explanation about the huge project, it is a pleasure for me to introduce our first speaker of the webinar series, Dr. Steffen Møller-Holst from Norway. He will give a presentation on boosting the economy in remote communities via hydrogen technologies, the Norwegian case. And as you'll for sure see, it is very much related to what you have seen in the video, and we hope that you will enjoy the presentation. So just before I introduce the speaker, I remind that this presentation is recorded and it will be made available through our Huge Project YouTube channel, along with the slides, with the PDF version of the slides. So before I let the floor to Steffen, I'll just give a brief introduction of his biography, his background. So Steffen is the chairman of the Norwegian Hydrogen Forum. He holds a PhD in fuel cells and hydrogen technologies, and he worked in the US for 2 years. He's been over 30 years in the area of hydrogen technologies, so he's one of the world experts. And it is a pleasure for me and for the Huge Project to give the floor to him and be the first presenter of the webinar series. So Steffen, thank you very much. The floor is all yours.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Pau. So it's an honor and a true pleasure for me to present in the first huge online seminar. So thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'll just mention before I start that we are also preparing for the next European hydrogen program called the Clean Hydrogen for Europe through my engagement as chairman of the transport part of Hydrogen Europe Research. So this program will potentially be a 2.6 billion euro program from 2021 through 2027. I put up this outline for my talk. I'll give you initially a short introduction to SINTEF. I'll then share some historic reflections for why hydrogen is so important for Norway, and then exemplify how this is currently shaping the future for Norway when it comes to energy and not least the industry. I'll give you some last points or towards the end, pinpointing the potential for value creation, which is again the key also for the European program for the next years to come. And then we summarize, and I'll give you, of course, the chance to ask questions. So one slide on SINTEF initially. SINTEF is Scandinavia's largest independent research organization. We employ more than 2,000 people. We have people from all over the world, 75 nations, and we are working in between businesses and universities by executing multidisciplinary contract research. And when it comes to the future technologies, low and zero emission technologies, we work all the way from R&D to implementation of new technologies. I'll come back to that. We have a wide portfolio, including combustion, battery, as well as hydrogen technologies. And especially today we are talking about hydrogen. So we started late 1980s with the fuel cell activity at SINTEF. And we have, over the last decade, had 29 EU projects in the area. We work interdisciplinary, as I mentioned. We're not only working towards technology development, but also looking into the socio-economic aspects of what this energy transition is all about. So starting out with this slide, I'm showing you where Norway can play a key role internationally within hydrogen. First of all, we can become a large-scale hydrogen producer from both fossil and renewable energy sources based on our vast energy resource in general in Norway. I'll come back to that point. I'll also share some points around how we are addressing the transport sector and industry. And last but not least, we will, as you can see to the left here, have the potential to be a large exporter of hydrogen and as well as hydrogen technologies. So, but I'll take you 2 centuries back, because this is really the background for why Norway is so engaged in hydrogen. As in many other areas where the population doubled, this led to starvation and malnutrition, and almost 1 million Norwegians emigrated to America. As many of these remote regions, as mentioned in the video when we started out this seminar, we rely on natural resources. In Norway, especially fishing, mining and timber export. We had some textile and mechanical industry, but what Norway was or became known for internationally was the international fleet, which was established during the 1800s. But towards the end of that century, it was evident that with the growth of population growth, the challenge is that the soil is starving from nitrogen, from lack of nitrogen, and that created a race between 3 different researcher groups, one in US, one in Germany, and one in Norway. And as probably some of you know, Professor Birkeland succeeded with his companion, the businessman Sam Eide, in the ARC technology in 1903. This way, it was possible to fix or extract nitrogen from the air, and this paved the road for Norway becoming the world's largest producer of fertilizers. And it also led to the establishment of the Norsk Hydro company. And the process itself was replaced because it was not a very efficient process. It was later on replaced by the German Haber-Bosch process. But this led to industry in Norway, which is currently on the fertilizer side carried further by the known company Yara, which is still the world's largest fertilizer producer. And as well as you can see also here, the electrolyzer technology is carried out and further into the market by Nel Hydrogen. I'll come back to that. But we, as the picture shows here, we already during the Second World War and later on established huge plants of water electrolysis technology. These are still in the range of the world's largest built plants, and one of these could power more than 200,000 fuel cell electric vehicles, just to put it in perspective. So this has over the time also paved the road for a lot of initiatives because Norwegians and the Norwegian population is aware of the history we have behind us when it comes to the huge plants for producing hydrogen, one in Glomfjord and one in Rjukan. And that has, I'm showing in this slide that we are not only focusing on hydrogen production from hydropower, which is of course dominating the Norwegian energy and electricity production, but we are now looking into a lot of other sources, including wind, natural gas, and even solar power. One glance at why also Norway is so engaged in energy and the utilization of energy resources. From the early 1900s, we started to utilize the many waterfalls. We, from the late 1960s, found oil and gas in the North Sea. From the mid-1990s, Norway became the world's largest producer of silicon for silicon or solar cells, and recently we are engaged now more and more heavily into offshore wind. And this picture shows and diagram shows the huge energy production in Norway, somewhere between 2,000 and 2,500 terawatt-hours per year, which is dominated by natural gas and oil. And to the right, you see the domestic energy use, which is, as you can see, around 200 terawatt-hours. So we export more than 90% of all energy produced in Norway. And we are the third largest natural gas exporter in the world. So what can the future bring in this perspective? What is clear is that in the future, hydrogen will become much more important, not least because of the policies in Europe are clearly pointing at decarbonization towards 2050. So Taking you through this again, because the value creation in Norway is really based on these natural resources. And one example of how we can exploit more of the renewable energy sources is the stranded wind. We have roughly 2 gigawatt of potential for stranded wind in the very northern part of Norway. And one example of what is currently being established is a electrolyzer plant, 2.5 megawatt in Berlevåg municipality. This is directly connected to the wind park from which this picture is taken. If the direct connection is not or is making it possible to avoid grid tariffs, which I guess you know is a cost driver. So this makes it even more attractive to produce in this area. The electrolyzer is very dynamic, meaning that it can provide stabilization as both of voltage and frequency in this weak grid in those remote areas. And as I mentioned, we have succeeded in getting public support from EU, a project which started with a small pre-study I did for the municipality of Berlevåg, which led then to a feasibility study, which with industry included, and then eventually a 7 million euro investment. Not a big electrolyzer though, but still significant for this small community, which is located far north in Norway. As you can see, this is the village of Berlevåg. At the bottom, you see the house for the facility for housing the electrolyzer, and this is now being installed. The electrolyzer will be in production from the fall this year. And what is then the potential for end use of hydrogen in such areas? 1 ton of hydrogen would be enough to power 3,000 passenger cars and 500 minibuses. So you need to think big here and outside the region to get a market for this hydrogen. And we are considering also these days not only the conventional industry, which is of course in this region fishing. We also discuss with a new program in Europe called Clean Aviation, where we are together with the Fuel Cells and Hydrogen Joint Undertaking in Hydrogen Europe. We are now looking forward and formulating the program towards 2030, where we are joining forces to see how hydrogen can become a potential fuel, at least for the commuter medium-sized airplanes, as you see here. And one benefit that I could and should mention is that fuel cell electric vehicles have longer range in themselves, but they also have especially the better characteristics when you operate in colder climate. So there are many prospects also for the future for fuel cell electric vehicles in these regions. And to the left here, you see a Finnish design for a fuel cell powered snowmobile. And this 1 ton per day, which is related to the 2.5 megawatt electrolyzer, is only the start. If you look at the concessions given at the 2 wind parks, they are at 225 megawatt, which cannot be utilized because the grid is so weak in this area. That could account for 50 tons per day, and the wind potential in the region is around 2 gigawatt, as mentioned a few slides ago. So we are talking big numbers here, and this would be enough to power 500,000 passenger cars, just to get the size of it again. Many potential applications, but at the last line you see also I put up export as with question mark, and I'll mention why this is important. The value creation in rural areas is as usual related to natural resources, but if you can supplement those areas with export possibilities, that's a very interesting asset. We work together with Statkraft, the largest largest hydropower producer in Norway, to look into how the wind energy from these wind parks could be utilized at Svalbard, the island of Svalbard, which I guess some of you are aware of and know something about. They are currently getting their power and heat from an old coal-fired power plant, and of course that's is potentially and should be replaced over the time. There was a consultancy report to the Ministry of Energy in Norway where they recommended LNG, but that only give marginal CO2 emission reductions by 30 to around 30% compared to coal, maybe a little more, 30 to 40%. Whereas this, of course, triggered a lot of objections from NGOs and many other entities. So Statkraft, the hydropower producer, asks Sintef to support on outlining this hydrogen-based power system, in which we have both looked into hydrogen as well as ammonia as a potential hydrogen carrier to move this energy from the mainland to Svalbard. I'll take you to or mention something that could be probably potentially not a big industry, but there is a whiskey distillery, very seldom and very rare in Norway, of course, compared to Ireland and other areas, Scotland. At Myken, this small island, which is located 30 kilometers from the mainland, there are 40 households. Only 10 people or 9 people are living there all year around, but they have a distillery, and we just got some funding from Enova, which is one of our funding agencies. We will look into how we can utilize local wind and solar energy to fully replace the current LPG used for the distillery. And they have had problems with a very old cable from 1965, and last year they ran the diesel backup for more than 2 months because they had trouble with the cable to the mainland. So these areas are, and this type of application is potentially something that could be of value for many rural areas, I would expect, and remote areas. Last example I would like to share with you is Rullestad. That's this beautiful area in the southern part of Norway, very hilly mountains, almost 2,000 meters from the top of the mountains to the fjord. And in this area, we've looked into how you might utilize 4 concessions given to small-scale hydropower plants. They are potentially utilizing the energy from runoff rivers. The grid connection would be very expensive, in the range of more than 10 million euros. And all in all, just in this hilly area, as you can see here, we are talking about more than 100 gigawatt hours of stranded runoff river power. There is a smolt production, the small fish, which are then eventually becoming salmon, which is also a large industry for Norway. Nearby, this marine harvest facility, and they use more than 1,000 tons of oxygen per year. And as you might know, that if you split water, you get hydrogen, but you get 8 times more oxygen. So this all in all looks to be a very promising case for electrolyzer technology, and not least hydrogen. But then you should utilize the hydrogen, for instance, for heavy-duty trucks, as we illustrate here. And if the production is exceeding the local use, then we are talking about export of hydrogen from these areas. So to the bottom right, I show you a report that one of 2 reports that we provided to to the Directorate for the Hydropower in Norway. And that could also be used. That this concept is very interesting, but of course you need to match and look into hydrogen market primarily now, because the oxygen is already on demand, as you see here, but then you need to scale up the use of hydrogen. So hydrogen could in fact release and provide this local regional value creation by making it possible to utilize these concessions. The last area I wanted to share with you is the transport part of hydrogen technologies. As you see here, the huge oil and gas production is contributing by 30% or roughly 30% to the Norwegian greenhouse gas emissions, but transport is, because we have a long distances, low population density. All in all, we are roughly 5 million inhabitants in Norway. Transport is contributing by 30%. And for some of you, it might be surprising that electricity is only contributing by 2%, and that's we have an easy explanation for that. And the Norwegian electricity production is almost solely covered by hydropower. So we are already renewable in that sense. So I'll take you into the potential to become an early user of hydrogen in transport. When talking about greenhouse gas emissions, the passenger cars are typically what you're having in mind, but in Norway we have almost as large an emission from vans and heavy-duty vehicles. And this January we launched the first heavy-duty 27-ton truck distribution lorry, as you can see up to the right here, together with ASKO, which is the largest wholesaler of groceries in Norway. So again, with support from Enova and with Norwegian industry as suppliers of technology, Nel providing electrolyzers, and Hexagon delivering hydrogen tanks, and the Swedish company Scania is delivering the truck. SINTEF is also involved in many, as I mentioned, EU projects. One is with the Dutch bus producer VDL and Bosch, where we develop a range extender, as I show you with the red brackets or the red square here. We work with zero emission diggers. We are heavily involved in various segments of maritime transport, ferry boats, cruise ships, and high-speed passenger boats. So there might be already next year the first ferry, roughly 100-car ferry on the sea in one of the fjords in Norway. We've also been engaged in trains, but I won't use any time on that now. So this picture is illustrating Norway's engagement in low and zero emission maritime transport, starting out in 2000 with the first LNG powered ferry. We now have 21 of LNG powered ferries in Norway. The first fully battery electric ferry was the Ampere Norled ferry, which has been in operation now for 5 years, since 2015. And we currently have 5, up to the left you see 5 high-speed passenger boat concepts, which are competing to get some contracts very soon in that area. And we have Equinor and Wilhelmsen who have designed a liquid hydrogen tanker, as you can see to the very left here, and some other novel concepts. When it comes to our fishing fleet, we are now working with to design the first hydrogen-powered fishing vessel, a 15-meter fishing vessel, which we have plenty of in Norway. When it comes to industry, one example is to replace coal with hydrogen for metal production. There is also in Norway, as you saw on the domestic greenhouse gas emissions, huge emissions from the offshore industry. And here we work with Siemens and Ansaldo, two different suppliers of gas turbines, where we're looking into how we can replace natural gas with hydrogen in the near future. And fish farming was mentioned. It's a pretty big industry in Norway, and then you can utilize, as I mentioned, also the oxygen and heat. And then I show you at the bottom here some novel concepts where we work together with Technip FMC, looking into how we can produce hydrogen from offshore wind and store the hydrogen at the seabed. So just one slide on the use of hydrogen in fish farming. We are talking here about a lot of small-scale surplus hydropower, typically run of rivers which are in the fjords where these aquaculture plants are located. There are typically weak or absent electricity grids. We have, if we can connect, we have a very high grid connection fee. And these stranded resources are then very interesting to utilize in this kind of energy future. Unfortunately, a few of these citations from newspapers are in Norwegian. It's talking about Hexagon, who has got a $1 billion contract with the fifth supplier and developer of hydrogen vehicles, Audi, in the German Audi in this case, Nel, which is the world's largest producer of electrolyzer technology, the water splitting technology. They first announced that they would 10 times increase their capacity, but then soon after, in August last year, they claimed and have prepared now already the establishment of a 1 gigawatt capacity for electrolyzer production at Herøya Industrial Park in Norway. So we're talking about jobs being created. In this case, especially these two companies have already global markets for their technologies. They are leaders internationally for delivering tanks, hydrogen tanks, as well as electrolyzer technology. And in this area, SINTEF has or is working all the way from R&D to the left here, materials development through upscaling. We support communities and companies, and we're currently coordinating the largest installation of a PEM electrolyzer in the world, 10 megawatt in Germany. And as you can see, the second from the right here, the project in Berlevåg, which is also one of our very visible projects. SINTEF supports various industries. Over the years, we've had at least 15 of these pre-studies and also feasibility studies. We provide recommendations because we have the link also to industry supply or component and technology suppliers, and we have 30 years of experience in the area. And we then also carried out some testing, hybrid laboratories, even installations downscaled in this case, and for maritime applications. So, and of course, last but not least, we are engaged as coordinator for a national project with international also industry involved, where we look into how this can be scaled up in a safe way. And the main point is here that hydrogen is not new. It's been used in industrial scale, and 50 to 70 megatons are produced every year. But we are now moving into the more public domain, and that's why we have an extra view to the safety aspects of hydrogen. The major trend is going from the small vehicles to the larger vehicles and towards industry. we also are involved with Equinor, who are both involved in the Leeds City Gate H21, as well as converting a large-scale power plant in the Netherlands to convert hydrogen instead of natural gas, meaning that it can potentially become zero emission. So this is my concluding slide. Norway has abundant energy resources, and that makes both the production and, of course, naturally the export of hydrogen attractive in the future. We have internationally leading industry in various areas. We, as many of you also, we have many remote areas which are sparsely populated and who would also and could benefit from these new technologies. And we have multiple initiatives in those areas. Transport is contributing by almost 1/3 of our greenhouse gas emissions. And in that context, we at SINTEF can contribute to your community by identifying the promising opportunities and also provide some decision support in terms of maybe a pre-study or something. And of course, we would really love to foster future value creation in remote and rural communities, as this project HUGE is focusing on. So by that, I thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Steffen. It was an excellent talk, and it will really, I'm sure that there are a lot of questions that the attendees will have asked through the chat. So now I'll give to Magnus the turn to deal with the questions, and Magnus, floor is yours.
Many thanks for that, both Paul and Steffen. It was a really interesting presentation, and thank you to the audience for delivering so many good questions. I'll largely draw on the questions by how well they're ranked. You can go ahead and click the small like the question in the audience if you want to bump up any of the questions. If we don't get to your question, I would ask if Steffen is quite happy to share his contact details and can maybe follow those up afterwards via email or another means of communication. So to begin with, we've got a question here from Alex, and it's quite a good one, and I'll give you quite a hard one to begin with, asking why hydrogen and not using batteries? Doesn't it have a better level of overall utilization for grid storage and transport? Give you a hard one to begin with.
No, it's not hard at all. There are many aspects to why, or looking at battery versus fuel cell hydrogen. Of course, being engaged in this area for 30 years, my skin is getting thick when it comes to these arguments, because you're fully right. The efficiency is more than double with batteries compared to if you need to store energy, for instance. But there are so many other factors contributing to what solution you select. One example is the 27-ton truck that we just put on the road with ASCO, the delivery truck, has a driveline based on hydrogen, which is lighter than the diesel. It has a range of 500 kilometers. The similar battery electric delivery truck would have a range of 120. They already have one in ASCO, 120 kilometers, and they have to remove 1 or 2 pallets of goods because the whole vehicle is much heavier already with 120 kilometers range than the conventional diesel. So that's just one example. It's like that's just one example of why you need hydrogen. Of course, there is also the possibility to fast charge even a heavy-duty truck. I have close contacts to the biggest company, Statkraft. I mentioned Statkraft, which is Norway's the biggest hydropower producer, and it's even Europe's largest renewable energy company when it comes to production of renewable energy. So they're really into this, and they have done calculations of what the cost would be to when you compare battery electric heavy duty transport with hydrogen. And because the power would be so extremely high to get reasonable charging times for a lorry or whatever truck, the cost for infrastructure for the battery would be extremely much higher than hydrogen. And for a ferry boat, we are also talking about, we have a pure battery electric ferry. It's fine, it works good. We had some start problems with that, but the longer the range, the more power you need, the better hydrogen is, because the energy density is somewhere between 5 and 7 times higher than any battery we've ever seen so far. So that's the key answer to the question. But if you can both economically and technically use batteries, it's fine, then you select that. But it's both technology-wise and economically wise.
Very comprehensive answer there. Thank you very much. You mentioned electric ferries just towards the end of your answer there, and we've got a question here from Sigurd. And if it's a Sigurd, I think it is. He's based in the Faroes, and he's got a couple of questions. But I'll begin with the one that seems to be most well received. And he's asking that you mentioned the project of a 50-meter hydrogen-powered fishing vessel. What hydrogen usage is expected in terms of kilograms a day, and what kind of range in terms of days at sea is planned for? And how is the hydrogen stored on board? I would suspect fishing vessels is quite a common theme across the whole of the MPA area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fishing vessels is definitely not my special area, but we just now have started a project where we are designing a 15-meter fishing vessel. The experts when it comes to maritime transport is some colleagues of mine in that respect. We're working with a design company. They already outlined a first version of a fishing vessel with gases, hydrogen tanks on the deck and fuel cells in the bottom. I don't have exactly the dimensions on these, but we could potentially share if some are very interested in the details of that. We are looking in that we start the project exactly these days. We are looking into 2 fuels. We are looking into gaseous hydrogen as well as liquid ammonia. Not liquid hydrogen, because that's kind of, for this small volume, it doesn't make sense to make it liquid. But ammonia is liquefied at either minus 33 degrees, or if you go to 10 bars overpressure, it liquefies itself, making it more energy dense than gases, and even more energy dense than liquid hydrogen, in fact. So those are the 2 solutions, and we are just now starting the fishing vessel designs. So I don't have all the answers to the more complicated question you just posed.
Excellent. I've got another one here, just quickly to keep on the marine theme, perhaps at a slightly larger scale, from Anna Margaret, who asks, thank you, or suggests that thank you for an interesting and comprehensive presentation. How do you see hydrogen bunkering for marine vessels develop? Small electrolyzers serving one port, or distribution from central large-scale production plants, or somewhere in between?
Good question. This is also something that we are deeply involved in SINTEF, because it's, for every case there is an optimum, depending on volume and distance between source and end use. And we have, in fact, put up a mathematical model tool to handle this kind of optimization. We've used that maybe 15, 10, 20 times already One example of where we used this was the last example where I showed the 4 run-of river concessions given, and based on the production data which can be again simulated, we have made an optimization of the whole, even the annual variation in runoff rivers is very, it's not a stable production because it's all about melting of snow, and in the midwinters it's there are no water at all. So taking the source and the variations in energy supply into the picture, as well as the demand pattern, and then we do optimization for every case in this case, and we have in that for such a system, taking then either only hydrogen into account, maybe the utilization of oxygen if that is of interest, and not least potentially use of heat, because there is a roughly 30% heat production from the electrolyzer, meaning that if that is of a decent size, like the one in Finnmark, the 2.5 megawatt electrolyzer in Finnmark, that would produce 800 kilowatts of heat, and in a small area that could be heating all the households in Ballevåg, I guess, from a district or a substantial amount of the regional heat demand. So we have made these modules and a whole mathematical model which can exactly reply to your question, or but you need to make it more specific than, because there is not one size fits all. Definitely here it has to be custom made for your community.
Excellent. I think that was answered very well. I perhaps have another question here with an answer that varies depending on location and circumstance, but I'll give it to you anyway to see if you can answer. This is from Gunther in Shetland. He's the Energy Hub project coordinator, and he asks, as a fuel, how does green hydrogen compete price-wise with petrol or diesel vehicles?
Again, a very good question. The key here is scale. As an example, I was the coordinator of one of the first refueling stations in Oslo, and our counting back and calculating the cost of the hydrogen then we concluded that it was roughly 10 times more expensive than the energy comparison or the diesel compared with when we're talking about energy content. But this was one refueling station which had a huge overcapacity because it was, and we had very few cars in the project. If you scale up, as these are numbers from the world's largest electrolyzer producer, Nel Hydrogen. If you scale up to a 20 megawatt plant with a production capacity of 8 tons per day, then you can produce hydrogen with a cost or where the price is comparable to diesel. So at that scale, there will be no extra cost, operational cost, when it comes to fuel of your vessel or fleet of trucks or whatever but you need scale. It's very scale dependent, as many technologies are, in this case also hydrogen.
Excellent, thank you. I'm conscious of time, but I think we'll manage to get through a few more questions, and we've got a really interesting one here from Zinmin, who's asking, for isolated areas, the cost for grid installation is expensive. Would the transport of hydrogen also be expensive?
Yeah, the transport of hydrogen is expensive, and that's related to the low energy density of hydrogen, even in liquid form. It's 1/3 of diesel and gasoline. But I would draw on the example of Svalbard, where you produce currently power and heat from coal, and a kilowatt hour. The cost of 1 kilowatt hour is maybe 20 to 30 euro cents. which is far above what we pay for electricity in Norway. Hydropower in Norway is dirt cheap, right? Because we have plenty of it. We even produce 10% more than we need. So it's yeah, the price in the whole market is just crazy. But it depends. If the longer you are away from any central grid, the more costly typically the energy is. And then of course hydrogen can be moved. It's expensive to move it because it has a low energy density, but we have made some interesting also calculations for hydrogen export from Norway to Germany, and we look at a wind park in northern Norway, a wind park in southern Norway, hydrogen based on natural gas in northern Norway and southern Norway, and then you get all the flavors of which are the cost drivers. And transport of hydrogen is definitely a cost driver, but it's not only the transport itself, it's about distance and volume. So we found out that liquid hydrogen from Norway would be cheaper than extending the grid from 2,000 to 3,000 kilometers from northern part of Norway to Europe to transfer the wind energy, whereas from the southern part of Norway, it's cheaper to convert and use electricity. So it has to do with volume and distance. Again, we need to do a special assessment for a certain case to have a specific answer to the question.
Excellent. I think there's a kind of some clear themes coming out some of your answers, that we need to take a lot of these different aspects case by case and plug them into the models and see what the numbers come out there. Just bearing in mind that we in the huge project are looking at green hydrogen rather than any other ways of producing hydrogen. I've got a question here from Philippe, based at the Environmental Research Institute with Desislava and I, and he's asking if the use of hydrogen significantly ramps up for both transport and energy storage, is there a risk that the demand of energy for hydrogen production could not be met by renewable energy and still be heavily reliant on fossil fuels?
Mm-hmm. That's also a very good question. I guess most of you know that more than 95% of all hydrogen is today produced from fossil fuels. In Europe, natural gas is really dominating. There are also many flavors or many aspects here. One is that as renewable energy is scaling up, we know that already costs are coming down. So it's kind of difficult to say how fast this transition will go and how fast you can scale up renewables. How fast hydrogen would scale up compared to the availability of renewables is potentially or the key of the question here. I think from what we've seen with solar energy and now also with wind, even offshore wind is boosting these days, that renewable energy will be ahead of hydrogen. But it's all about, anyway, that source is really important here, and that is potentially taken care of through the certificate of origin, where we in Europe have had some very good processes through the Certify project, for instance, where we will support any taxation to differentiate and make preference for the renewable and green, and do as much as we can so that this transition is really also speeding up the introduction of renewables, meaning that the demand side for renewables, if hydrogen speeds up, then you would have higher demand for renewables, which again will cut cost for renewables. I guess, over time at least, because volume is going up. But it's very intriguing. I think that I don't think we can easily put up any equation showing all the potential factors in that puzzle, but these are some of them at least.
Excellent. I'm just looking at our time now and we've got 1 minute to go. So I would like to join Alex on the comments and questions section by saying amazing, good answers, Steffen, and a really insightful presentation and really insightful answers coming out of the questions. So I would like to thank the attendees for those questions and yourself for answering them so very well. With that, I'll perhaps pass back to Paul, who maybe has some closing remarks for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Magnus. Thank you, Steffen. I think it's been a very interesting session on the questions and answers, and definitely I agree with Magnus that there's been a lot of very interesting questions from the attendees, and we really thank the participation, the high participation that we have seen today. So with that, I'd like to conclude. I'd like to thank again Steffen. It's been great to have you with us with the first webinar series. And to the attendees, please make sure that you follow us in the Twitter. We have the social channels, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, our website, and we will announce the next webinar series in due time. Okay, so thank you all. Thank you, Steffen, once again, and hope you have a good day. Thank you.